What is up, my ducks and drakes? Welcome to the Crowded Lake. Today, we're going to be reading chapter 13, which is the final chapter and the epilogue of Bad Moon Rising, a Singer-Sides fanfic by Bekka911 on Wattpad. If you'd like to support this amazing author who has let me read her amazing story twice, go ahead and hit the links in the description below. As we are wrapping up this book, if you want to see any books for next week, go ahead and fill out the Google form to recommend fics for the future. With that being said, here is the final chapter. Deceit had one last card to play, one last plan to spring to life. It was going to hurt, and he was sick of things hurting. He really was, but he was willing to hurt for Virgil, because that's what this all came down to. Not bringing Virgil back to them, not because he was theirs. It was about following him into the light, about redemption for Deceit and Remus. Because even the bad guys were good guys once, and every bad guy has potential to be good again. So Deceit picked himself up, put himself back together, told Remus to wait, and walked into the shadows where something evil had once lived. Nothing lived there anymore. The abyss was empty. The wall was together again, and perhaps the wall was stronger now, not weaker, because Deceit had put more than his power into fixing it. He had put more than shimmering darkness. He'd put light into it. Purple, green, and yellow, because he was tired of the seething, writhing darkness that he'd had to grovel and live in. He was tired of pretending that Virgil belonged only to the dark sides, because Virgil had found happiness somewhere else, and Deceit... No. Janice had every intention of following him into those arms of comfort and safety. "Don't do it," Remus said quietly, following Janice into the shadows. They wriggled to make space for him. Janice didn't dare look back at him. Not yet. "Not now. We can go home." Janice shook his head. "At what cost?" he asked desperately, squeezing his eyes shut. "What's left for us there?" The shadows brushed along Deceit's face, hissing along the scales that hadn't been there once. Janice had hated them for so long, had even once tried to rip them off, but they soothed him now. He'd grown his own armor. He'd protected himself. He didn't need whatever hollow support the dark sides could offer him. "Remus," he whispered into the shadows. "Please." Remus's hand landed on Deceit's shoulder and spun him around. My, how they'd changed. In a moment of introspection, Janice could see them both as they'd been, eyes full of anger and pain and loss, blood fizzling with the need to not be alone, the need to stop watching their friends leave them behind. Wild things. That's what they'd been. Wild things that lashed out and screamed and pretended to not be bad when they were really just hurting. "You can't go," Remus said through gritted teeth, even as indecision warded with regret in his eyes. "You can't just leave. You can't go back to Virgil again and again and again. One day you'll just have to stop." And yes, one day Janice would. He would stop running, he would stop fighting, and he would stop trying to be everything that he knew he wasn't. But Thomas needed him not to be a dark side. Janice needed himself not to be a dark side. There was so much more to him, so much more that he could be doing. "Please," he said again, one last time. Because if Remus didn't go with him now, then Janice would leave him, like Virgil left him, and they would only ever see themselves as enemies. "Please." And Remus's hand lifted off his shoulder. The loss of that touch resonated through the shadows, resonated through Janice's body as Remus took with him the last strand of Deceit. because deceit had been a dark side, and deceit had been bitter, and deceit had wanted so much more for himself and for his people, and now Janice was something gray, at best, and nothing at all at worst. "Goodbye, old friend," said Remus, his composure and cunning and emotions restrained and molded into something dangerously close to affection. It would be the last time that Janice ever heard such a thing. Because they were enemies now. Remus wasn't going to leave the dark sides. Not like Virgil had done. Not like Janice had done. And maybe that should scare him. Because they'd all been so intent on getting Virgil back, so intent on making him theirs again. They'd hunt Janice down. Like he'd once hunted Virgil. And they'd be so much less than they were before, because there was so much less to them. The dark sides just kept on losing, and deceit was the one who was thought he could have won it all back. Janice knew, without seeing it, that Remus had gone back to them, had left him to the shadows that Janice himself commanded, and maybe it was supposed to hurt that Janice wasn't the first one to leave, but freedom prickles along whatever human skin Janice had left. He was done. He was out. He was gray at best, nothing at all at worst. There was a longing in him, he thought, as he dissolved into the shadows. He wanted to go to Virgil now, wanted to get down on his knees and plead his friend to take him back, to let him in, to please not cast him out into the nothing. He'd done all this for Virgil. Virgil might have done it for him too, once. But he couldn't, not now. Not after what Deceit had said to his old friend, desperate in attempts to get Virgil back. Not after what Deceit had done to Paddon, what Deceit had done to tear them all apart, because Paddon hadn't deserved that. And though it had worked itself out, Janice still hadn't said sorry. Paddon hadn't asked him to. So Janice couldn't go to Virgil, not yet, not until he'd mended things with the others, not until he'd apologized and begged and thrown himself at the mercy of the one person who might be able to talk Virgil into letting Janice stay. "I think it's time we finally had a talk," a quiet voice said from the doorway as Janice sat on Paddon's bed and stared at his hands. They were gray hands now, but there were stains on them under the gloves, forever stained by the darkness that he'd lived in for so many years, hands that shouldn't be a part of him, but were. He looked up at Paddon, who glowed strong and sure in the dimness of the room. Janice wanted to be strong like that, wanted to be light like that. "No lies," he begged. He was tired of lies. He was tired of it all. He was gray at best, nothing at all at worst. Paddon nodded his assent, and Deceit looked back down at his gloved hands. "How can you forgive me after what I've done?" When Paddon didn't do anything but appraise him considerably, Janice felt a part of him wither away and die. He was afraid of this, was so desperately afraid of not being allowed here, on this side of the wall that separated them, because he could not go back. Remus would never accept him again. Nobody would ever accept him again. Janice couldn't let himself be Deceit, not again, not now, not after everything. Paddon sat on the bedside with him. Janice didn't know what that meant. When Virgil first became a side, I was terrified, Paddon admitted gently, spreading his fingers on the duvet. Janice tried not to lean away from the words. I couldn't combat the energies he was giving off. I went with it because I liked to avoid conflict. He kept pushing Thomas, kept pushing us. I didn't understand him. Why couldn't he see what he was doing to our host? And Janice knew that. He promised he did. He didn't want to hurt Thomas, and now he found he didn't really want to hurt the others either. Janice was gray. At best. Nothing at all at worst. He flinched away. Patton didn't let him go far. It took me a long time to figure out that he was just as scared as I was, Patton continued softly. He hid behind his name and his purpose. We let him do that, and then we shunned him for that. I have not quite forgiven myself for that. And oh, how he'd ever felt threatened by Patton, Janice couldn't understand, because this settled, understanding side with nothing short of a miracle. Nothing short of a message sent to him just as his grip was slipping from the edge. Remus should have been this for him. Remus had tried to be this for him, but Remus had been broken by Virgil leaving, had been broken by his fear. Patton had been made stronger by it. Janice wanted to say sorry, didn't know how to make the words fit out of his mouth because he was sorry. Words couldn't express the regret he felt, the pain he'd caused himself by trying to spread his misery to everyone else. I want... He tried to make his voice work, to tell this light side that he'd been so scared of slipping back into the shadows, of being a monster again. He'd wanted to say that he wanted Virgil, that he wanted love, that he wanted to be safe. I think I want... Patton smiled and moved his hand until his fingers were brushing against Janice's. An offer. A lifeline. A bond of friendship that would form as soon as Janice let himself reach back. We'll be ready, Patton promised as Janice accepted that tentative offer. Whenever you decide you want to join us, we'll be waiting with open arms. The shadows seemed a little less dark after that. Janice was gray at worst. A light side. A friend. A brother at best. The epilogue. Wreaking havoc was so goddamn fun. Why Remus hasn't done this earlier was beyond him, because he'd never enjoyed himself this much. Being out in the open, being recognized and confronted just so he could turn it around and flood Thomas with some truly twisted thoughts. No wonder Deceit had liked to play games with them. They made it so easy. And Virgil? Oh, Virgil. Remus did his best not to address his fellow side directly, because that's what Virgil was expecting. And so he would have his defenses up. What a sensitive soul Virgil had become in his time with the light sides. How amusing. How utterly pathetic. If he just stayed where he belonged, with the sides that were the scary ones, Virgil wouldn't be so vulnerable and weak and disgusting. Creativity is about butterflies and magic, Thomas said hopelessly, throwing his arms out. That's not you. You're stinky? Thomas just drew his hands close to his chest again. Scary. Oh, that wouldn't do at all. Remus was not scary. He wasn't around to elect fear. No. He was creativity, just like Roman. Me. Scary, he said, feeling just slightly offended. Surely Thomas didn't know that little about him. Surely the others hadn't kept him so sheltered and ignorant. No. That sounds like a you problem, He pointed at Thomas, then at Virgil, who shifted uncomfortably and scowled. Or a him problem. Thomas, like it or not, the Duke does encompass a portion of your imagination, Logan said calmly, and Remus wondered whether the logical side could be counted as a light side at all. Surely he wasn't a dark side. No, he didn't have enough of an agenda for that. But he seemed fairly neutral. Perhaps he was neither. If that were so, Remus would have to keep an eye on him. No good having loose cannons lying around where people could trip over them and snap their own necks. Patton said, Imaginative sure is a kind word for him. Remus didn't bother much with Patton. Deceit had laid claim to that one, not like that did anything for the traitorous snake. No, Remus was more fond of Logan and his strange neutrality. I agree, he said, though despite himself. How about demented? And then the miraculous happened, and Remus almost squealed in victory. Virgil turned to Logan and asked dangerously, Why are you defending him? What a fun game! I simply must congratulate Deceit for his wondrous idea. Perhaps I could bring him and Virgil both back to us. I'm not, Logan said, despite the suspicious looks that he received from both Virgil and Thomas. I'm just trying to be intellectually honest with Thomas. Sounds like bullshit to me, Remus said flippantly, just to add some more chaos to the mix. This dork's Deceit in disguise. Spoiler alert, he wasn't. It was ridiculous how easy they all fell for it. It was all so simple, and Remus was loving it all, minimal effort on his part, plus the added bonus of setting Virgil so on edge that he was turning on his own friends. Perhaps there was hope for him after all. Shadows, if they stayed too long near the light, could burn away. Remus hoped Virgil knew that, because that's what was happening. He was burning away, and Deceit would not be content to just let it happen. Virgil belonged to the shadows. He was the shadows. He would return to them. And if Virgil returned to them, Deceit would follow. They would be whole again. After Logan had assured everyone that yes, in fact, he was Logan, and Remus admitted to lying just to mess with them, Virgil once more turned on his fellow side. Then why are you lying? Lying? Logan repeated. Remus almost wanted to take him back to the others just to see what they could do with that brain of his, those cool ambitions. Logan would flourish under their care, his neutrality nurtured and honed. Remus almost itched for it. You just said the Duke is Thomas's imagination. Patton said something that agreed with Virgil. Honestly, Remus wasn't listening to morality. Patton was too emotional and boring and soft. Remus preferred Logan and Virgil. And so they went on. Remus messed around with Thomas's thoughts, monitoring the dynamics between the light sides. It was humorous, because according to Deceit, they worked together seamlessly, but as soon as Remus himself showed up, they seemed to split down the middle. It was interesting, but not as interesting as Logan's continued calm and measured thoughts, or Virgil's aggressive denial of literally everything, as well as his panic. He was so on edge. The Duke was thriving. You made me this way, Thomas, he purred to his host. I was the unloved brother of the Genesis. Roman and I are Cain and Abel. Ooh, Remus liked that. How very fitting. How very unnerving. And then, of course, he had to throw in some butt stuff, mock Thomas's work. Strangely, that seemed to get Logan's calm to break slightly. Interesting. Remus tucked the knowledge away from later. For after Virgil and Deceit had come back to them, and he would claim Logan as a dark side as well. Oh, I'm sorry, he continued hauntingly after Logan's little disruption. Did you forget that part where I'm your creativity? Obviously, I have opinions on the matter. But are they opinions that matter? Virgil asked snappishly. Remus just smiled a little wider because Virgil was doing it to himself. Was he truly so worried about Thomas finding out about his past? Were the others so fragile in their friendship security that one wrong work, one acknowledgement of the wrong thing would break them apart? How pathetic! Honestly, Remus didn't envy them one bit. Push, push, push. How far could he push them before one of them broke? Push, push, push some more. Suggest things, let his inner rottenness out. Add some pressure to Thomas, make them remember those thoughts. See how much they can take before they crumble. I just did what I do as one of Thomas's sides, he said. If I'm awful, then so is Thomas. And Virgil got agitated once more. Not all thoughts have some profound meaning behind them. Some of them are worthless. Remus sighed, pouting ever so slightly. Time to push a little harder then. Virgil, you've never been one to soften the truth. Anxiety recoiled. Why would you aspire to be so boring? You've changed, is what he was really trying to say to his fellow dark side. Come back to us, Virgil. We want you back. You're coming back. You're going to get you back. The last pushed work, and Virgil was the first to fold, surrendering to the thought that Thomas wasn't necessarily a good person. It was amusing to hear such hopelessness, such defeat, in a voice that had once been so bitter and proud and strong. Virgil had been away from them for far too long. He can act like a good person, just like Deceit can act like you, but we've also seen that doing what he thinks is right can be pretty difficult for him. You two are blowing this way out of proportion. Logan, I'm sorry, but Thomas can't logic his way out of this one. Facts are facts, and the fact is, Thomas had some twisted thoughts that a stable person would never have. How delightful. They were all caving, and Remus couldn't be more pleased. They were all caving, except Logan, and Remus watched in fascination as the collected side simply reasoned his way forward. He never stumbled, never faltered. Remus desperately wanted to see how far that balance spread, and how he could break it. Then the most glorious thing. Logan barely stopped himself from calling Virgil paranoid. Oh, the old Deceit would have killed to be there for it, and Remus made a mental note to brag about it to the others when he got back. The look of hurt on Virgil's face, the sting he must have felt. Remus basked in it. This was all brilliant. Regardless of whether he won this or not, whether he got banished or not, Remus had gained something so very precious. He was irritated by Logan's ability to land blows and prevent Remus's impact, even when Remus stole his teeth, threw a ninja star, did everything. The side was unaffected. That was quite frustrating, yet still so intriguing. The light sides encouraged Thomas to get some rest, and Remus knew that one last push would undo the iron grip Virgil had on his memories. He'd have to admit it. After the pressure from Remus and the breaking of the wall combined, Logan's gentle scolding, his own paranoia, the dark sides were winning, and they were winning by a long shot. They weren't, and everyone seemed to know it except Remus. They weren't because Deceit had left them, just like Virgil had left him, and it was all going to fall down eventually. You know it's funny, Virgil said to the Duke, voice calmer. You used to really unsettle me. I thought you were some terrible illness. Now I could see that you're just a common cold, a mild inconvenience that's gone before you know it. Remus just had to laugh because, oh, Virgil, the anxious side couldn't win this anymore. Once he admitted it, they'd come for him, would swarm him like flies. The Duke didn't unsettle him anymore. Fine. There were more to come. Oh, you little tickle me emo, he clapped. Well, I enjoyed this. Good seeing you again, Virgil. Oh, it was just like old times. And then he sank out. Not without leaving a small connection open through Thomas. He needed to know if his malicious plan had paid off. He listened through minutes of boring drivel, feeling sick. He listened until it was only Virgil, and he heard the blessed words they'd all been waiting for. Because I was one of them. You still are, Remus breathed, and something stabbed through him when there was no snake hissing in his ear. Thank you. Thank you all so much for listening. It means the absolute world to me, and I love doing things just like this. If you'd like me to continue, please subscribe. It's a huge encouragement to know that people are listening and engaged and actually want to hear stuff like this. If you want to hear a specific fic, please feel free to fill out the Google form. If you'd like to hear more from Bekka911, as they do make other incredible works, I recommend checking out their 2 links to the book and to their Wattpad. So go ahead and do that. I also have some other links. But, yeah. This is it for this series. Once again, kind of sentimental. Thank you so much for listening, and much like Remus trying to hold Janice back, do your best.